Hello, and welcome to Recapping with Delora
and Ashley.
Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Recapping Podcast.
Also, rate, review, and subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform. We're on all the things.
We want to hear your thoughts on the movies and shows we review.
Leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or our YouTube channel, and we will read them during the show.
Or reach out to us on social media. We love talking all things entertainment and pop culture with you.
Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, Delora.
Hey, Ashley.
We are back with a special episode. It's kind of a mix between our In Conversation series and our usual recaps. We are going to be chatting with the creative director and executive producer of a docuseries called Beyond the System, A Journey Through Foster Care.
Yes, it was such an eye-opening project, and I can't wait to talk more about it.
Absolutely. Well, welcome Shondale Atkinson, the executive producer, and Tiffany Countryman, the creative director.
Welcome, welcome.
Hey. Hello.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. So I actually got a chance, Shondale, I know you guys have done 2 viewings in the Dayton area, and I got to make it to the second viewing. And I remember when I was going up to the table, they had snacks and things like that. And they were also like, here's some Kleenex. I was like, hold on, Kleenex? I guess this is going to be a little bit of an emotional roller coaster.
Told
Let
you
me get
everything
ready.
You needed to know.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly. But phenomenal opportunity to watch this project. And my feedback to Tiffany was like, okay, I'm gonna have you guys on the podcast. So we are
excited to have y'all.
We are going to kick this off with our first question to Shondale, which is, this is really your personal journey being one of the central stories that's featured in this docuseries. You were in and out of 21 foster care homes. Tell us a bit more about the journey that brought you to your work today with this documentary, as well as your nonprofit, the Mustard Seed Foundation.
All righty. Well, I thank you both for having me on the show, and I appreciate Tiffany bringing you to view the film, Ashley. And so what brought me to this journey? First, I'll go back to, 21 foster homes. I became a teen mom when I was in foster care at 17. And that was my first introduction into what it really felt like to advocate for myself. Up until that point, I can remember being very silent and being very timid and docile, just, very afraid to speak up and stand up for myself in foster care for fear of, what would happen if I did. So I learned to just take it. However, once I had my daughter, Taria, it just opened up a whole new world for me. Like, I'm not going to let you guys do to my daughter what was done to me in care, and I'm fully capable of taking care of her. So I pretty much, advocated for myself, fought with the system, had my daughter, and her and I left foster care together when I was 18. And, that's my pride and joy. So I learned at a very early age what it meant to really have to stand up for yourself against a system that held rights for you. So, after I came out of foster care, me and my daughter and I ended up going back to school, went into school for nursing, and started to work in this hustle and bustle world of just, building a career and building a family. And I kept hearing this call and this, like, okay, you're going to do this home. And I was like, you can't be talking about me because, that teenage mom's home that I was in, we were a mess. So I was like, ain't no way you calling me to start a home for teenage moms. And after a few years of me, I tell people I was running, but I believe God was just letting me, him just continue to groom me and prune me for the mission of starting the Mustard Seed Foundation. So about 2007, I started to really get serious about starting this organization, and I didn't have anything. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any, I'm working on the floor, and people know me from that. People know me as Nikki, but no one knows me from this woman who's talking about starting this nonprofit and had been in foster care all these years. So, it was an uphill battle. For 2 years, I was running around trying to gain support and talk to anybody about helping me start the Mustard Seed Foundation. And finally, Precious Blood Church and Community, the Sisters of the Precious Blood, had reached out to me and told me that they found out about me trying to start this organization for teen moms, and they gave me opportunity. And so I ended up being in their building. It was like a 12-bedroom home up in Trotwood is where I started, but not just looking at my own story and my own journey, but being able to really see how much the system is impacting kids even today. I'm 47 now, and I'm still seeing families separated for the same reasons that my mother lost her kids, which was drug addiction. And my mother still suffers with drug addiction. So I think about that, about, all of this time and all of these kids and all of these things that has happened, between me and my four siblings, and what could have been done differently if I was on the opposite side, if I was in the system. What are some things that they could have done differently for my mother, but then also for her children, that would have given us more of more process, more transitions, where we wouldn't have been so broken coming out of foster care. So, it led me to really want to talk about it and have a conversation about what's going on in the system. Why do we have to come in for one reason, but then we're abused and we're beaten and we're raped and all of these things are happening to us up under this one system. And, somebody has to be held accountable for that, or somebody needs to listen to some of the things that we want to, we would like to have changed about this system.
Shout out to Precious Blood. That's amazing.
Yes.
By the way,
Absolutely.
listeners, if you hear a little bit of some lagging, things like that, don't worry. It's a storm going on while recording today, but the
Summer
message is
storm.
clear. The message is clear.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that and for sharing that story. What made you know that now was the right time to make this docuseries, to tell your story, and in this format in particular?
I could go back to the moment when I absolutely remember hearing the voice of God about the Mustard Seed Foundation. And even though I tried to, again, ignore it or run from it, God was like, right now. And I knew it because the energy, spiritual wisdom, he was just dropping so many things in my spirit I couldn't ignore. And it was the same way with this film. I had been pretty much, especially now because I own the Mustard Seed Foundation and I've been doing it for 17 years, the frustration, the level of frustration that I have with the system is like, I'm talking about, like, to be re-traumatized on the opposite side of the system, from going to being in the system to now doing business with the system, and to encounter so much trauma even on that side of it, and trying to advocate for girls and trying to give them their voice and make sure that they understand that this is your baby and you have the rights to be able to say, yes, this can happen with my child, no, this cannot. Just trying to really work with our girls, I started to become so frustrated because this system is so broken, and there's just so much red tape, and there's so much going on, that I started to look at, okay, Shondale, you're putting up Facebook posts, or you pretty much trying to go to people. You're going to your county commissioners and your city commissioners and your mayors, and you're like, anybody help me. Like, I need to be able to get to the people who understand the reforms and the laws and the policies, and just, I need someone to help me fight this battle for these kids, and no one was listening. And so in that frustration, I started to really pray and just ask God, like, how would you have me to be able to share this story? And it's interesting because he made me do the thing that I didn't want to do, the thing that I'm most uncomfortable with, which was telling my story in a bigger platform. I was okay with just my little circle of people knowing what I went through, but I didn't want the world to know what I had incurred. And I didn't really want my mother to know what I had encountered in foster care. So, God was forcing me to really talk about it in a way that I was uncomfortable. And that's how I knew that it was the Holy Spirit, because it wouldn't let me sit in my comfortableness. And so, I started to really talk to people about telling this story. At first it was a book, then it was a movie, and I wanted to quit. And God was like, you want to quit because you're trying to do all of this by yourself. There is a team of people. Tap into those people. You will be able to see that the load would be lighter for you. And that's exactly what happened when I made it a docuseries and made it a documentary, where it brought on other voices. It allowed other people to share their stories and their pains of trauma also. And I did. I found a lot of healing and even hearing their stories.
That's beautiful. I have a quick question. With the name of your foundation, Mustard Seed Foundation, and just in your conversation, you talk a lot about God. I'd like to know your faith journey in that, like, we watched your documentary and it was really heavy, but it was very heavy. And I appreciate your transparency and the safe space that you allow other people to tell their stories as well, to inform, the world of what's actually going on. I'd like to know, when did you find yourself first leaning on God?
So one of the things about my faith, in my relationship with God, was that it started very, very, very young. I can remember I remember one day my mother had, because my mother was a crack user, but my mother always had a Bible. Like no matter where we were at, my mother always had a Bible. I can remember us one day being in a shelter downtown on Fifth Street, and a lady had she had gotten sick. She had passed out. My mother went over to help her, and when my mother, before the ambulance got there, my mother had told me to go run into the building and go get her Bible, and I did. And I don't know why that particular moment stood out to me out of every other moment that my mother has introduced me to the Word of God. But I always knew that like God was my refuge. I loved church, even though some of my greatest abuse happened inside of the church. And that was the thing that was challenging for me, was that I loved church so much and I loved God so much. But there were people that was inside of his house that were doing things that just, what I mean? And it was like everybody turned a blind eye to it, even though they knew that it was happening. So on one hand, I'm struggling because, this man who I call dad, who's also a pastor, is raping me in the church. And at the same time, I'm crying out to God in this church. And so, I always knew that, and I don't care where we was at, the church van was going to always come and get me. I'm going to always call the pastor. I knew that number by heart, like, come and get me. We over here on Adelaide in this abandoned house. Can you come and get me and my little sister? So, on one hand, you had people that were not representing what God had shown me he was. And on the other side of that, you had people who were. So I knew that I wanted to gravitate towards the people. I wanted to be one of those people. I wanted to be Pastor Johnson and his wife. I wanted to have that safe space for kids to come to and be a representation of who God is. So, yeah.
Wow.
I'm so glad that God kept you so uplifted through everything that you've been through, because a lot of people wouldn't have made it through the circumstances that you've described and that you talk about here and in your docuseries. I wanted to pivot a little bit to you, Tiffany. What attracted you to this project and to your work?
Well, Shondale has been a part of my life for a while now. I just sent her a post the other day where she had her summer camp for the kids, and I was up there donating balls and stuff. And I had an event, and she let me use her school bus to go pick up some college kids. So we've always had this collaboratory relationship. When I was in my era of community service, since then, I have shifted into my area of creativity and artistry. So we've remained connected or whatever. So a few years ago, we've been talking about this project for about 3 or 4 years. So a few years ago, Shondale brought me in and she was like, sis, this is what I want to do. We even also talked about a book at some point. And then she said, I want to do this documentary. And I was like, okay, sis, let me know when you're ready. The timing just wasn't right then, especially for me. And I know that Shondale has some more, things to go through. The timing was right for me. And then a few years later, Shondale hits me back up like, hey, Tiff, like, I'm really serious about this documentary. We met in the chicken wing spot over on the west side. She brought me and Mr. Muhammad together, and she told us the vision, and I was in. For the simple fact, I'm a storyteller. I believe in the strength of stories, the artistry of stories, the importance of stories. Our history is a story. So I was in from the beginning simply because of the relationship that I had already cultivated with Shondale, and because she was ready to tell her story.
So Ashley and I love film, TV, documentaries. So I'm curious about what influenced your choices around the structure, the visuals, and the music to support the emotional tone of your documentary.
Well, it definitely was a collaboratory effort. When we first set up the recordings, everyone was on set. Even Shondale was on set, but we also had Mr. Stephen Muhammad, who was our videographer, and then we had Thomas Trotman, who was at the time our sound guy. He hooked up all the mics and made sure that we had everything we needed as far as sound and lighting. So the initial start is that we just wanted people just to come in and tell their stories. I will start off with one question, and the question was, how do you know Shondale? That was the one question I started off with. And I wanted to get people comfortable because everyone that Shondale had telling the story, she knew personally some way or somehow. So I wanted to get everybody comfortable, like, this is family. So when they would tell me how they knew Shondale, I would respond like, oh, and this is how I know Shondale. Just open up that, common, vibe or energy in the room. So that was how I got them to tell their story. In the documentary that you saw, the first parts, the two parts that you saw, that's not even half of the people that we've talked with. We've talked with other professionals, other foster parents, other foster survivors, a whole host of people. We have a whole session that's just going to be surrounding the crack epidemic itself, that will tell the lineage of Shondale's entrance into the foster care system. Because if you watch the documentary, you know that her mother was also a foster child. So there's different, sections to it. But as far as setting it up, we just wanted to get the story told. Once we got the story and went into the editing room, Thomas Trotman, our editor, he shifted from our sound and lighting expert to becoming the editor on the project, which I think was very fundamental because, of course, you could send it to another editor and they could do this, that, and the other. But someone that was actually in the room with us as we experienced these stories, he was able to put a special twist on it. So when we had our collaboratory meeting, Shondale and Thomas and myself, I just went back from the beginning. I said, I want you to start it off and telling everybody, how do they know Shondale? Because especially at the premiere, everybody in the audience knows Shondale. Shondale is a celebrity, okay? Everybody knows her. So when that starts off, it allows everyone else to relax, like, oh, okay. And then we go into the story with Shondale starting off her story. As far as the music piece in particular, I will say that at first Thomas had the typical documentary music, the typical documentary music. Yeah. But I said, this is not Shondale's vibe. Shondale is more of that neo soul, popping and mellow. So we're gonna need to do that. And actually, he produced some of the music that's in the documentary himself. And then, of course, he was able to pull some from other areas. So that's pretty much how the creative direction started.
I also found it interesting visually how you guys did not stick with one story continuously, how it was kind of, here's a piece of this person's story, then you leave me hanging a little bit. Okay, we're going to this person's story. Now I'm still curious about this person, but now this person's tale wraps into, like, I just thought it was a very, especially because Delora and I watch a lot of documentaries, like we're probably a little obsessed, and particularly like certain true crime and things like that. So I'm kind of used to seeing narratively how survivors tell stories, things like that. And I just thought it was impactful to do it that way because everything blended, but also left me wanting more. Cause I was like, oh, wait, I can't wait to hear more from this person or this person to like finish that out. So it kind of left constant cliffhangers almost.
Yes.
And I thought that was really creative.
That's exactly what I wanted, Ashley. And I'm so glad, as an artist, my skin is like, she got it. That's exactly what I wanted, because the foundation of the documentary is Shondale's story. So what I told Thomas is I want everyone else, their story, to echo what Shondale is saying. She's leading the story. So we sat down and interviewed Shondale raw, and then we picked pieces on how to do what you were saying. And, a secret, I've been researching ever since Shondale been talking about this project. All I've done is watch documentaries for like the last 2 or 3 years. And I've seen the different types, the different type of B-roll, the music, the feeling that you get. And like you said, the survivor, format versus the, I guess, episodic or historical format. It really resonated with me, and I wanted that to translate on screen. So I'm glad that you got that.
Yeah, and it's funny too. Remember, we had you on for a recap of a documentary series previously. Yep. So It makes sense that you've been in your documentary bag and it translates so well to this. Shondale, did you have anything you wanted to add into that on the creativity and direction of the piece?
I was actually going to say, like, kudos and hats off to Tiffany, because, even when we came to sit down in the room, like, we would do these meetups where we would be like, okay, let's go through the film and look at it. And we allowed Thomas to have full creative, control over the film with him editing. However, when we came back to the table and, we had to be like, hey, and one of the things I really commend Tiffany on is the fact that she was able to be like, okay, this is what I see visually. And this is, So she was able to help lay out the creativity of it and really stand on what she had already seen in her vision for this film. And, and it was interesting because really between those two, I just kind of sat back and let them have that because again, I knew I was so emotionally attached to the story that it was so hard for me to see it. You know what I mean? I'm like every time
Yeah.
I would watch, I would just have to walk out the room. I would just be in tears. There was just pieces and parts of it that I was like, okay, and I even told him like, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it until the day of the film. And Tiffany was like, you got to watch it, sis. And I was like, okay. So again, I just trusted them, and they did a remarkable job with the finished product, and I'm very happy with it.
Love it. Love it. Tiffany, you already kind of addressed my next question, but was there anything else, since this is such sensitive subject matter, that you guys did to help cultivate that safe environment for the folks who participated?
We just gave them space. When we were scheduling filming, we gave each participant an hour, so that we can give them space to tell their story. Like Shondale said, there were times where we had to, pause production because it became too overwhelming emotionally. There was fellowship after some interviews. I remember Shondale and one of our participants, they were just hugging and crying and talking, and it was like a therapy session. It was such a vulnerable space that I was like, we just need to let it breathe. We need to be cool. Like I came in, and I remember our first shoot. I came in, I didn't have on no makeup. I had on a t-shirt and some ball shorts or whatever. And Shondale looked at me like, "Are you getting on camera?" I was like, "No, no, no." I would, because she didn't know the format and how I was going to record it, but I wanted to come completely just bare and vulnerable because of what the weight that these stories held. And for a lot of people, they're scared to tell these stories. Particularly the story that Ryan shared. Like, he is now a multi-millionaire fitness instructor. He never wanted to talk about being abused by a man, but I had to open up that space. And that's why if you watch the documentary, he points at me like, "No, you didn't get me to go here."
Yes.
Because people came in broke, and it was like therapy. It was like therapy. So I just gave space. I just gave space. That's the short answer to the question.
I think what you said too about how you showed up, how you presented was actually super important, because I think that human to human connection, like when you watch the docuseries, you can hear your insertion at certain points, like take your time or something like that, but we can't see you. So the energy you brought, the vibe you brought, I'm sure made a huge impact and difference too on everyone's comfort level. So that to me, that makes a huge difference.
And you all spoke to this already, but I like to just go into a little bit more detail. Was there a particular story or moment that stayed with you the most while editing the project?
I will say the moment that stuck with me more was, and again, because I think all the stories were so impactful, but the young lady who was in the film, who, she was a transgender in the film. She was born a young boy, a Black boy, and transitioned to a female. But the whole time that she was in care, I could relate to every single thing that she said, from being in the house with the white men, with the white people, them being racist, them having an older white child who was very abusive to him. You know what I mean? Like, it was just all of these pieces that I resonated with. I remember being in a house when I was 9 with the white couple, and I tell people that was the worst experience of my life, because it was right after I had reported that I had been being molested by my foster father, and them moving me to this home was like it was punishment. And I can remember being locked in rooms, and they had farm animals. This house was so extremely dirty and nasty, and so I would have to go out and take care of the farm animals, and have to, I would go to school smelling, and I would get picked on all the time. I would always get hit and things of that nature. And so her story really resonated with me, and hearing that, and being able to sit in rooms with her even today, because we brought about this relationship from this documentary. And so, I can see young Shondale even in her today, and that part of her that needs to forgive, one, and then also the healing piece that comes from that, and how it's so continual, like it's a continual journey to heal. And so her story really resonated with me more than anything. And so, yeah.
For me, it's Shondale's story. And I think because for me it was so personal, you know stuff about your friends and about people. And she's always been a foster care advocate. So I know that she went through foster care. But when we sat down and she started sharing the details and just knowing her now and how strong she is, how giving she is, how happy and loving she is, to know that somebody went through those things that you actually know, it was very hard for me to digest. It was hard for all of us to digest. Even at the first talk back and even the second talk back after the showings of the documentary, people that know Shondale, family members and friends was like, oh my God, I had no idea that you were going through this. When the mayor presented his proclamation, he was in tears, he was choked up because this was someone that he has had as a student in school and had no idea that she was going through these things. I think after hearing Shondale's story, every other story was just like, this is effed up. This is effed up that this is going on. And I related as being a Black woman to the things that Black women go through, that these things are happening. And there's multiple stories, different characters, different faces, different countries, and yet nothing is being done about it. So every time I heard a different story, Shondale's was like my foundation, my baseline. So when I heard another story, it was just like, yep, that's what Shondale was saying. That's what Shondale said. So for me, the most impactful story was Shondale's itself.
Oh, thank you.
And again, thank you so much. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing your story, Shondale. It's truly incredible to see your strength. It's beautiful to see all the work that you are doing in this space. What challenges did you face during the production of this film, both logistically and emotionally?
Oh, so one of the things that I had dealt with for years was one, whenever I would get ready to tell my story in any type of way, book, I would have articles in the paper, and, my mother would make me feel really horrible about that. And my family, my siblings would, it was just, we still haven't really had this connection as a family to really work through these challenges of what the foster care system did to us individually and collectively. So, we're all still broken in our own way, and in that brokenness, our relationship not able to be severed. We had been brought together, and so it was so important though that I spoke about parental drug addiction and how profound it is to societal issues. And my mother's part of that story was so important for me that I did not want to leave that out. And, like Tiffany was saying, my mother grew up in foster care. Her mother died before she was 2. So, I went into foster care before I was 2. When I look back at all of our records, a lot of, my siblings went into foster care before they turned 2. So I started to really look at this, like, this is a generational curse, mommy, that we got to talk about it. We don't know what happened with you in foster care. You don't know what happened with us. We don't know what happened with each other. We've all been separated for so many years that I just wanted us to all have this moment of healing together. And in my mind, that's what I seen. But in God's plan, it was different. And so my challenge was accepting that emotionally, because at one point my mother, my siblings, all 5 of us was like, yes, we're about to go do this together. And it was like, yay, I finally got everybody to agree. And then right, like 2 weeks before it was time to do this film, of course my mother had been using. So when me and Stephen got by the house to go do her first interview, it was just, and I was like, okay, Stephen, get out. My mother was cussing us out, talking about, I don't want to talk about this. And Nicole, how dare you tell my business? And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. So that very first day that Stephen and I were supposed to shoot, when I came home, I was so broken. I mean, I'm talking about my heart was so broken, and I had really had to deal with the fact of, okay, again, I'm feeling rejected, and I don't want to keep going forward. And I remember that night, I was so upset with my oldest sister, because my oldest sister was like, Nikki, just move on. Nobody wants to talk about this. Just move on with your life and, get over it. And I remember those words of her saying, just get over it, hurt me so bad. And I told her and my mother that day when I was at my mother's apartment, I said, it's crazy that y'all telling me to get over something that you haven't even asked what it is I'm trying to get over. And and I'm talking about, I've tried everything from, drinking to, I'm just going to set my problems away. I'm going to run my problems away. I'm going to serve my problems away. I'm going to, I'm doing all of these things and nothing is working. And all I want to do is just vomit up this pain at this point. And y'all keep telling me to hold it or get over it. And so emotionally that, I had to figure out a way to move on without them. And that was very challenging for me, because I didn't want to tell my mother's story without her being involved with it, because I didn't want her to feel like I was talking about her. And I also was thinking about that you have other grandkids out here that don't know who you are, Irene. We don't know who you are, so our kids don't know who you are, and to leave this earth without us having some understanding of who you are. And so, I had to sit with that pain, and I woke up the next morning and I remember God telling me that, like I hadn't dug deep enough. Like I hadn't gone deep enough, and I hadn't really thought about what he had shown me in the vision. He didn't really show me my family per se. He showed me other people, and I just put my family in there. So I woke up the next morning. It was 2 women that I texted and said, hey, I'm doing this film Beyond the System. From my sister's perspective, I wanted the story to be told from an older sibling who was pretty much raising all of these kids and didn't really have a chance to have a childhood during that crack epidemic. My sister was pretty much our protector and pretty much was, I've seen my sister be raped. I've seen my older sister go through a lot. So I wanted to be able to have that story from her perspective of how was it being the oldest during a crack epidemic and how did you handle that? And so because she didn't want to do it, I'm like, okay, who can I think about who was living during that crack epidemic, who was an older sibling and who could really talk to this story? So I texted 2 women. One of them texted me back right away and was like, yes, I'll do it. And just that yes from Tina Shaw, it really changed my whole, I'm talking about it changed everything, because then I started posting on Facebook like, hey, if you were in the foster care system, if you went through anything or whatever, please reach out to me. And people just started to respond. So it made me feel like I was no longer alone. And I thank God for that, because like Tiffany said, that first day that she showed up, it was crazy. My mother called me and was like, Nicole, are you still doing your thing, your program thing? And I was like, yes, ma'am. And she was like, I want to go with you. And I was like, okay. And so the voice that you hear of my mother on the film, it just so happens that she just happened she wanted to come with me that day on our first shooting. And before we got ready to go, she was like, Nicole, I haven't talked yet. And that just really did something to my inner. She was like, I don't want to be on camera, but I just got some things I want to say. And Stephen was very sensitive with her and really made sure that she really felt comfortable in the conversation. I did not go in the room at all, so I did not know what my mother said until the day of the film premiere. I had no idea what my mother said. And so that was very, again, most emotionally, that's what I went through. I really did want to quit because I just couldn't see myself doing this without my family. And, God just worked it out where I didn't have to. He gave me a village of people to help me.
Shout out to your cousin, by the way, I think it was, who was in the docuseries too, who was like, I hunted them down. I was going to find out where my family was. And I'm like, she was also young, and to have that, that older, I want to take care of vibe similar to your sister in the midst of everything that was going on. Like I was really blown away by that while I was watching the docuseries. Tiff, anything from you?
As far as difficulties, I would say us, so we're all very strong, creative people, right? So the difficulty of us all coming together, not that it was any drama or whatever, but there were some times where I had to be like, no, this is what we need to do. And then it was sometimes when I had to be told, nah, Tiff, this is what we need to do. So if I was to say if anything was difficult, that would be it, is that Shondale brought together some powerhouses, some dating powerhouses, and we all know what we're doing, and we all have a certain way that we want to do things. So Shondale was successful in bringing us together, and we were able to work together because all of us had the same, goal in mind. Like, this is for Shondale. This is what we're doing to tell this story. So it wasn't much an ego thing. It was just sifting through all of that, if you will. But otherwise, everything was perfect. Shondale made sure we had the spots to record. Mr. Muhammad came in. It was a few times he had to go get some batteries or whatever. Stephen had everything. and we would sit down and just fellowship. We would go home. Missy would have snacks and stuff set up for us in the other room. So it was a vibe. So other than that, it was a very enjoyable creative journey.
I've gotten to experience a little bit of this at the viewing that I went to, but now people have seen episodes 1 and 2, pieces of that. So the thing is out there. And as creatives usually say, once the thing is out of your hands, it lives out in the world, you're going to get feedback. So what has the feedback been like now from family, from participants, from viewers? What's been the reaction?
So I think that the reaction for me is that, I enjoy the talkbacks because we get to hear it like right there, raw, just right after people have seen the film. And it was that first opening show, the premiere, it really did change my life because, again, I had been so fearful of telling this story, and I knew that there was people in this film that really, again, they did not want to technically disclose this, what they had been through, but they did. And I was able to see, people was in the theater crying. People were in there laughing. It really did. It just gave my heart so much joy because even afterwards, a young lady that I've been knowing since I was sneaking in her basement, and she never knew this. I was friends with her oldest sister, Mika, oldest sister, Jessica, when we went to Woodbury Wright. And nobody knew that I was running away from my foster home and running away from my house like every couple of days or every few days or whatever. I'm running away. I'm trying to escape what's going on with me with this man, coming in my room every night. And so I didn't like staying at the foster home that I was in when I was at Woodbury Wright. And just so happened Jessica and them did not live far from my foster home. So I would run over there and Jessica would let me sneak down in her basement and stay there. And Mika would know that I was down there and know that I was her sister's friend, but she never knew what I was going through. Jessica really didn't know. And so, to see Mika in that theater break down and feel and display the pain that she felt at that moment of knowing, like, Shondale, I just wish that you would have told us. I wish I would have known and you would have never had to go home. And to me, that really touched me because, like, today, Mika and I are just like Tiffany and I. We've done a lot of great things in the community. We partnered up on different things. We talk about everything from politics to, education with kids and youth programming and all of these amazing things that we've done. And she never knew. She never knew what it was that I was going through until she sat in the theater that day and watched that film. And just her emotions, she couldn't even contain her emotions. She was just so overwhelmed with, like, wow, I just wish I would have known. And so I thank God for that moment. I thank God for the moment of the young lady that was in the theater. She's currently in a group home. And when she stood up to ask the question, and the Holy Spirit just shifted the whole atmosphere towards her. And my brother, Carl Kennebrew, he was there. He stood up and he prayed. He prayed over this young lady's life. And we all came into agreement right there at that moment. It shows the glory of God that we can literally capture salvation for anybody, anywhere. And a lot of times it is just about telling your story and being brave enough to just give someone else, like it doesn't end here. And so, I look forward to seeing that young lady that is currently in that group home years from now, being able to stand in all of God's glory. Remember that day that, that the whole community surrounded her with love. So that's what I've been getting from this. And so I tell people that I've had to let that feeling of both being in both theaters, that, I had to let that feeling and that joy and that emotion and that healing and that therapy and all the things that we encountered during this process, I have to let that outweigh the pain that even comes from it. My mother walking out that first day at the theater and, me not being able to talk to her since then, it was very painful because I felt like I had accomplished something so good and I seen that it helped so many people. But on the opposite end of that, I'm still feeling a lot of pain from my mother's heart, being hurt by that film because that was never my desire. And so even today, it's still very painful.
There's still more work to do, I know, to complete the docuseries and to be able to distribute it. So what are the needs that you guys currently have and how can the community best support you?
The first answer is definitely money. We need money. money, money, money. Other ways that people can help is that we need a recording studio. We can benefit from some more lights, some more mics that we can own, that Shondale can have like in the trunk. Because like she said, there are places and people that she wants to tell their story, but because life is the way life it is, we have to go to them. So the money will help in the editing aspect of everything, getting everything situated again. We want to record some more interviews and stuff like that, spreading awareness. Shondale's desire is to get this on college campuses, to get this as a curriculum, to get this in front of politics, to get this at different group homes, at different foster care professional companies and organizations. So spreading awareness, letting people know that, oh, there's a real life documentary of people talking about what it's like to be in foster care from different angles. And that's what I appreciate about Shondale's vision, is that we just didn't interview foster care survivors. We also interviewed the professionals. We also interviewed foster care parents. We interview all sides of the story of what this system is lacking and what it needs. So again, money will be number one. Awareness is number two. And you can email Shondale if you want to actually donate a specific item for the project.
Thank you for those calls to action.
You mentioned money. Is there a particular goal you're reaching for? Are you close to that goal, or is because how many parts are you breaking this up into? Is it going to be eight parts? Okay. Just was curious what that process is when it comes to raising funds.
So the goal is not a goal, because we'll always need money. So there's goals, little goals, but there's not a large goal, because, okay, so aside from getting everything finished, packaged, recorded, then we have to pay money to enter into festivals. Then we have to pay money to travel, to shop this in front of different streaming networks. So the money will be filtered in different places. We just don't know what the actual need is to set a specific goal, if that makes sense. So we know that we will need money. So I would say, to give an actual number for it, so to get it done, to get everything done, edited and package it in its 8 parts, I would say we need probably about $50,000.
Okay.
But we currently have I was going to say to add to that, we currently have a GoFundMe page. And on the GoFundMe page, as Tiffany said, I'm one of those people that I think about things like in small increments. I break it out to make it realistic when we're asking people for support. And so I started out with the GoFundMe is $10,000 is what I asked for on there. I ended up collecting maybe about 1,700 outside of what people was kind of sending me on Cash App and things of that nature. But that GoFundMe is still up, and that'll help me with at least getting, some of the editing pieces done. Because the goal is that, again, we get all 8 parts done. So that way, when we do start shopping it to the streaming networks, it's a complete package is the goal. So like I said, right now, I can share the information that we have for the GoFundMe account, and I would really appreciate it. That's really what we need is people push that GoFundMe account. But then also, I want to get into just colleges. Like my first college that I'll be going into is the University of Cincinnati, working with a college professor there, with Professor Everett. And so that'll be like my first college tour stop. And that's really what I want to do. I want to get into every college campus that I possibly can, because to me, it's important that we talk to the people who are going to be coming out working with these kids, working with these families, that they get a good idea of, these foster care youth are not just case numbers. These, call kids by their names. Let them know that they have an identity, that they're valued, that they're respected. Like, okay, I understand that I'm 8, but don't call me, my caseworker called me a crap baby in the middle of a courtroom. And I'll never forget this. That was the first time I ever heard that term. And it's stuck with me all these years. So I'm really wanting to talk directly to, your police officers. You guys are the first ones on the scene when it's time to remove a child. You throw the kid in the back of a cruiser, and it feels like I'm going to prison. And so, you introduced me to these cyclical, traumatic experiences that causes PTSD. So now every time I see a police officer, I take off running. I don't know that that police officer is there because of, to help protect me or keep me safe. The last time the police officer came, he yanked my arm and threw me in the back of a cruiser and took me to a building, and all I seen was white people. So, there's just ways that I would like for this system to really understand that you don't have to re-traumatize kids every time it's time to remove them or, to advocate for them. So, I want to make sure that we're talking to the social workers and the therapists and the police officers. And, this conversation is the politicians, as Tiffany said. It's a conversation to be had with everyone, your healthcare professionals. So, yeah.
I want to say that a lot of people have asked before, why don't we just shop the first 2 episodes and allow a network to pick it up and pay for it? Is because we don't want them to dilute the story. We don't want them to have creative control. You've seen what Netflix done to Pop the Balloon Challenge. It's horrible now. So all I'm saying is we want to be able to have the full creative control and then present it to be spread for more awareness.
We'll have the link to the GoFundMe in the show notes for people too for this episode.
You touched upon this in my last question, but how do you hope lawmakers and child welfare professionals respond after seeing this project?
But the goal is that, first of all, we're coming in a non-confrontational stance. That was one of the things that was important to me too, was that I wanted to be heard. I didn't want to be right. I wanted to be heard. So, the film is constructed in a way, and that's another reason why it was so important that there was other professionals in it. There's teachers in this film. There's healthcare professionals. There's social worker that's in the film, and you hear them saying, I wish I could believe a kid the first time, but we just don't. And, trauma is trauma. So I need the lawmakers to understand that, one, foster care is the biggest human trafficking system in the nation. And it is also, when I think about it and I look at my siblings and I look at my mother who's been in and out of the prison system, my brother in and out of prison, my other brother in and out of prison, all of them are addicted to drugs. And I have to ask the lawmakers, do you really think that what you guys are doing is working? And if it's not, can you come into agreement with us? Can you come into alignment with this film to be able to say, okay, let's take and pick apart pieces that we can work on together to make the foster care system, even the way we transition out of foster care. You're 18 and it's like, oh, okay, it's your 18th birthday. I'll get no more money for you. Let me pack up your bag and put you out on a curb. And it's like, okay, well, now what am I supposed to do? You've kept me from my family my whole entire life. And then you drop me off at 18 and I'm supposed to go rebuild a family with people that I don't know and that you've been very intentional of me not knowing. So, I just have to go rebuild my life from the pieces. And so, that's one of the things is I wanted to just have these conversations with lawmakers and politicians to say, we could work and do a whole lot more work with the foster care system.
How do you hope this project supports survivors of foster care abuse in their healing and advocacy work?
My hope is that it just starts the conversation. And that's one of the things that I have noticed since I've been talking about the foster care system and this film has come about. I'm seeing posts on Facebook. I'm seeing people who have podcasts hosting conversations about the foster care system. And, a couple of days ago, it was 2 brothers on the show, 2 young men that were on this podcast. And they were talking with Tiffany and they were having this conversation with the Hood podcast about their traumatic experiences. And that's really not so often that boys are talking about what happened to them. But these 2 brothers got on there and they really, had this conversation and people really received it and gave good feedback. So for me, that's really all I want. I want people to have a space to just talk about it, and, that's the one thing that I felt was that, it was like, and I have lupus. I was diagnosed with lupus in 2015. But I believe a lot of what my hospitalizations going in and out of the hospital was just because I was carrying so much pain that I didn't know what to do with. So now I feel like, okay, now my healing journey has began and I could be truthful and stand on my truth about what I've gone through without feeling embarrassed or ashamed or like it was my fault.
Last question from us. What advice do you give to other foster care survivors and people trying to heal from, difficult life circumstances?
The one thing I'll say is that it's your, like, I'll say this. I remember telling my brother this. You can't hold the key to my trauma and my healing. And the same thing for my mother and anyone else that was complicit or whatever, even in your addiction, I have to hold you accountable. And I have to hold myself accountable for not allowing whatever you feel to make me stand in this space of not being healed. And, I have to forgive you, but I can't forgive you if I'm still holding on to the pain and not talking to you about it or talking about it. So the one thing I'll say is, from a survivor standpoint and those who've been in foster care, understand that the journey may be lonely to healing. You know, for me, it was like I had this whole image that my whole family, we were going to all do this healing together. But when God gets ready to call you out and separate you, and that's what he talks about in his word, you have to be willing to let him do that. And so that's one thing that I would say is that, don't let people who held on to your trauma or, caused you trauma also hold on to you being able to get to that point of healing. And just find you someone, a therapist. I tell people I'm in counseling every week, and I enjoy talking to my therapist, and she helps me in so many ways. And even today, when I'm going through traumatic emotions with my mother and things of that nature, I pick up the phone and I call her. So, get you someone that is rooted in the word. That's what Tiffany has done for me, even outside of this film. Tiffany knows I text her, or, Tiffany check in with me, like, how you doing, sis? And I can be so vulnerable and so real and so raw with Tiffany to be like, hey, I'm not doing well today, and this is why. And Tiffany will stand in it, she'll stand in that space with me, and she'll tell me that she loves me, and she gives me permission to just feel. And that's why I thought it was so important for Tiffany to be in this film, because she's one of my safe spaces. And so I appreciate that. But definitely I would tell people to find you a safe space. And, one of the other things I want to say too, right quick, is that, one of the things God showed me how to do was, it's not replacing my mother, but the relationship that I formed with like Mama Daria when I was like in my 20s, she was like my surrogate mother. At the time, she taught me how to forgive and how to love and not have that anger in my heart, and how to praise God and how to worship. So, you could get you surrogate family members who will stand in the gap for you. So sometimes we expect for our other family to be able to do it or to show us, but they don't have to be the one to do it. You allow God to feed you what it is that he needs for you to have, and trust the universe to bring whatever it is that you need. And so, yeah, definitely build you a village around you.
This is universal advice and wisdom you've given that resonates with me.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Any final thoughts, Shondale or Tiffany, that you guys would like to share while we have you today?
My final thought will be is never be ashamed of your story. Never be ashamed of your story.
Love that.
Well said.
Yeah, I think my final thoughts would also be, just if you're ever in a position to help someone, pay attention and don't turn a blind. And I don't care. Sometimes we think about help on like this macro level, but micro is just as important for so many different reasons. And so even just if you're a social worker or anything, just hugging a kid, if you're a teacher, hugging a kid, if you see them withdrawn and they're not, engaging, or if there's some change in them, be intentional with whoever cross your path to be able to make sure that you're always in a space of being God for people. You know what I mean? Like being the light of who God is. You can show that, and it'll help so much.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. This docuseries is so impactful.
Thank you.
The additional information and stories and journey on this episode is also very impactful. So thank you so much for being open, because you're really making such a huge difference in people's lives with the work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us for this episode. Please share it out with everybody you know. We appreciate it. We'll be back. But in the meantime, as always, be blessed.
Bye.